Um, Good evening, everyone. My name is Susan McBride. On behalf of the Hinsdale Library, I would like to welcome you to tonight's presentation, Spotlight on College, Tips for Admission Success. Tonight's speakers, Kim Anderson, Georgia Bepley, and Kendall Hayes, are the founders of Spotlight College Advising, and collectively, they have more than 40 years of college counseling experience. During the course of the next hour and a half, we will be covering the ins and outs of college admissions today with tips to help increase your success as you apply to college. Please make sure to use the Q&A feature in Zoom to ask any and all questions that you have throughout the presentation. They will either be answering them as they go along or save them up until the end, depending on how relevant they are to what they're talking about. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kim and Georgia and Kendall. And I thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you so much, Susan. We really appreciate you hosting us. So welcome, everyone. We appreciate you spending your evening with us to try and learn a little bit more about navigating the journey to college, whether you're the student or the parent. We think that what you learned tonight is going to be super relevant, and we're thrilled that you're here. So without further ado, I'm going to launch off to college is just ahead. So this presentation tonight is targeted at high school students, 9th through 11th grade. We might have a senior here or there trying to get a little information on something, or some 8th graders. I think I had some families reach out to me about that. So welcome to those of you that I know. I'm based in Hinsdale and my children went to Hinsdale Central. So I think it's a large majority of our audience. So I appreciate you coming. So tonight's presentation, we're going to first start with the kind of discussing the impacts of COVID-19. After that, we'll discuss admission, college admission and costs. Then we will delve into kind of figuring out how you can help your child determine what the right fit is for college. We'll chat a lot about school selectivity and kind of understanding the parameters around that. We have a great slide kind of giving you a deep dive of highly selective admissions on one school that'll help you understand why it's so competitive to get into those selective schools. We'll give an overview on standardized testing, which has been all the rage in the last 24 hours with some news from the College Board that Kendall will share with you later. We'll discuss application, kind of what comprises your application and how we help our students approach this, the strategy they're going to use for their various schools. And then the last piece is money matters, because the reality is most of us are going to probably have more than one child in college at one time, and college is expensive. I remember when my oldest went and we started looking at schools, and my husband and I looked at each other and said, oh my gosh, it really does cost that much money. So the reality is, in any way, shape or form, you can save money. We want to give you all the tips that we've kind of learned along the way. So let's jump in. So the first bit is kind of what has changed during COVID-19. Obviously, if we had done this, we've been doing these presentations. In fact, Kendall and Georgia, I was thinking about that as we were preparing, since COVID first hit, right, last spring. And it's almost like we need to timestamp it, right? So today it's like January 20th, 2021, because I feel like as each day passes, things change so much. And it's, as COVID has evolved. So in the beginning, one of the things that the colleges were really good about is it became really difficult as a result of the schools being shut down to do any kind of standardized testing. ACT and SAT are two very common admissions type tests that the colleges look to see. And if the high schools aren't open to, offer their room for rent, it's impossible. So we've seen slews of cancellations. I've had clients go out of state for testing. I mean, just kind of craziness going on. Yeah. But the colleges responded in a really positive way. And about 99% of the colleges said, we are going to be 99%, we are going to be test optional for this admissions cycle. So for the students that just graduated, they were able to go in and be test optional. The only exception to that is the state of Florida, and they have some issues with needing, special state approval. So the state of Florida did not go test optional, but everyone else did. And interestingly, the state of Florida's applications numbers are down about 50%. So
Yep.
it was not a good strategic move on their part. So the other thing that was different is the Common App platform that we'll talk about in a little bit is the main application platform that a lot of the colleges use. So they really, part of that application is a 650 word personal statement that's the college's chance for your student to talk about who they are and answer some prompts. They didn't want everyone's prompt to be about COVID. So they did the smart thing and they added a supplemental essay that was optional. And you could talk about how COVID impacted your family. So you might have had a family member die or you helped in the cause in some way, but something that's compelling. So that was a really nice add-on, I thought, for the Common App. And it gave the students kind of an outlet to talk about how this has been impacting them. So that was a positive. Initially, when we started these webinars back last spring, a lot of the projections were talking about, what were students going to do? Were they going to start college last August? Were they going to defer? And I think some of the projections showed deferrals were going to be up as high as 50%, which I personally always thought was a little aggressive because most of the students that I worked with were really interested if they could in starting and getting off, kicking off, whether it be their freshman or their senior year, but getting on campus. So the reality is what happened is if you look at any of the research now, the average deferral is around 10 to 20%, depending on the school that you look at. Research has kind of shown the more selective schools like a Harvard, people don't want to pay that kind of money to go online. So Harvard's deferrals really were at 20%. So, but some of the less selective schools or smaller schools didn't see those numbers of deferral. So for us, we're always going to we'll talk about it tonight in terms of what impact that has on the current senior class and the class of 2021. So we'll chat about that a little bit. And then ultimately what ended up happening, everyone suspected that the numbers were going to be way down, that college applications people weren't going to go to college. They didn't want to learn online. And what we found for the current seniors, the class of 2021, there's something you'll learn about in a few minutes, the early round where you can apply early action or early decision. And those deadlines are around November 1st, that the numbers were insane, through the roof. And I have a slide here, I'll just give you perspective. So these are some of the selective schools, a chart that was put together about the numbers and what they look like. So this is the 2020 early round for the class of 2021. This, this past fall versus the fall of 2019. MIT up 62%. I mean, all the way down to Northeastern and Boston at 5%. So it was bananas. Like what they found is that not only were students applying, but they were applying to schools they would have never applied to in the past because they didn't have to give a test score. So what the impact that had on a lot of the seniors that were going early decision that potentially had in the past what would have been considered a fairly strong application, it tended to get a bit lost in the shuffle. So a lot of the seniors are potentially retooling, changing strategy. They had other applications potentially that they submitted this past January 1st or even January 15th, but it's just insane. So I guess I like to say the pundits that kind of projected how this was all going to play out were completely wrong. But interestingly, if you look at the common application numbers, they're in terms of number of students, they were only up about 6%. But what they found is that those students applied to far more colleges. So that's what was driving a lot of these numbers. So the next bit is talking about how the colleges have sort of adjusted to COVID and what they've been doing. So one of the big things, the silver lining that we say that's come out of this entire COVID experience for the colleges is it's really forced them to up their virtual game. So all the universities have now really solid virtual tours, and some of them will even be live on Facebook. They'll have virtual information sessions and live information sessions, but without having to leave your house, you really have the opportunity for the first time in history to get a good sense of what it looks like on that campus. It's not perfect. Certainly we'll talk about some tips in a little bit about things you can do to improve that, but that's been a silver lining. As we've heard in the news, a lot of the classes went online. Some of the campuses were more, I would say, aggressive than others in terms of getting kids back. I think Notre Dame and Purdue were two that kind of stepped out front early on and said, you know what, we're going to do our best and we're going to get the kids on campus and we're going to go with it. And I think they've actually been really successful. The large majority of the campuses are probably under more of a hybrid model where some of the students might be living on campus, only certain classes are on campus, only certain, grade levels. So it's been a mix, but overall, I think that what I like to say to families that I'm working with is, as you're evaluating colleges, think about how the college responded during this pandemic. Were they someone that came out as a leader that was really like doing the research? They had good saliva testing. University of Illinois has been phenomenal, right, with their saliva testing. But look at those types of things, because the pandemic, we know there's a new strain. We know the vaccine's launching. It's not going away. So particularly for the class of 2021 that's hoping to be on campus this August, look at how the schools responded as you're making your decisions. The schools experienced incredible costs. Amazing. University of Michigan projected last spring it was going to cost them about $1 billion between lost revenue, additional costs. I think University of Illinois' numbers, the last I saw, around 300 million that they were projecting as a loss for last year as a result of all of this. So we'll talk a little later about financials, but as you're evaluating schools, you have to keep that in mind. If you're looking at some of the smaller schools, make sure that they are on solid financial footing, because this has been a really big thing for most of them to deal with. And then the final thing is just negotiation of costs. So I would like to say that, wow, the colleges have really stepped up and been really agreeable in terms of negotiating price. But the reality is the large majority of the schools haven't really discounted the tuition for the fact it's remote learning, or even if it's a hybrid learning. Some of the schools are kind of coming out talking about offering certain scholarships as discounts. So I think that as you're looking at schools and trying to kind of evaluate, again, whether you be a senior, junior, sophomore, kind of look at what they're offering. And, college typically goes up about 3% a year. So just see what they've offered, to particularly the current students, and whether or not they've offered scholarships or discounts to kind of offset this COVID, I guess, inconvenience, I'll call it. So, all right. So I'm going to turn it over to Georgia next to talk a little bit more about the costs.
Thanks, Kim. So I'm Georgia Bepley. I'm one of the partners and consultants at Spotlight College Advising. So thanks for being with us tonight. So one of the things we like to talk about is, how did we get here? How did college get so crazy, so competitive, so expensive? So, some of you parents who are online tonight, I'm sure you're here because you realize it's changed so vastly since you have been in college. So normally I'd be doing this presentation in person, but I'm going to talk about this. I want you to sort of reflect on your time in college. And kids, I want you to think about where your parents are coming from when they give you questions about when they were in college. It was like this. I know parents are getting the eye rolls, but it's important to understand where our history is and where it's going. So what's changed? Back in my day, how many people applied to more than 3 colleges? Well, nowadays it's 8 to 12 colleges. And so students have really spread out across the country, applying everywhere, applying internationally. And we also have a big international population that applies in the United States as well. When I applied for school back in the day, it was 2 schools and they had to be in Illinois, but that has all changed. Okay. What else has changed? So the ACT and the SAT. So how many times did you take it when you were preparing to go to college? Was it more than once? And did you even study for it? Did you have a tutor or anything like that? Attend a class with a larger company? Well, nowadays, Most students take it 2 times, especially locally. I would say most students take it 2, if not 3 times. And I can't think of a student who has not prepared for it, not necessarily with a paid tutor or a paid company, but there are lots of resources available for students, and low price options as well for them. And then of course you can go very expensive with a paid tutor as well. So that's changed a lot. I remember I signed up, I took it once, I never studied, and that's how it is. And it's changed dramatically. So, and then next, applying, so sort of application strategy. Did anybody apply early decision? Does anybody even know what that means? Back then, I didn't know what it meant, but now it is an important part of the application process. And Kendall's actually going to talk about that a little bit further when she comes online here, but it has become a strategy on how to apply, and there are certain ways to sort of help your application with that. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then the cost. The cost, like Kim talked about earlier, I remember when we went to a college campus, I had the exact same thing. I looked at my husband and said, oh my gosh, it really does cost this. You just think you're going to get all these scholarships, and you may get some, but it usually doesn't cover enough. So, back then, maybe people had around 15,000 or less. I think my whole undergraduate was like 15,000 for 4 years for everything. So nowadays, the average student debt is around 31,000 and above. And that comes out to almost like $390 a month for a student to pay. And if you think about that, that's like a big car loan. Perhaps the whole amount could be a down payment for a condo or their first home or something like that. So it's a large amount of money. And we're not even talking about what the Parent Plus loans are. That's not even including that. That's including like a student debt, not the Parent Plus loans. So it has become very expensive, and it's important to us as counselors to have that conversation with you when we're working with students, because we want to make sure that you can, save as much money as you can through scholarships and other manners as well. Okay, next slide, Kim. Okay, so as we talk about these costs, we put together this chart for you comparing the 1990 to 2020, and the cost of tuition, room and board, and fees. And don't forget fees, because they really add up at a lot of schools. It's 5 times higher now than it was back in 1990. So if you look at this chart, like Boston College going from almost $15,000 to over $75,000 a year, that's just like crazy. You could see the other schools, Northwestern, very similar to Boston College, 18,000 to over 76. Notre Dame, 15,700 to almost 77,000. And then there's University of Illinois, where I went to school. Yay, go Illini. 7196 to 32,814. And they just announced a couple days ago that they are planning to raise not tuition, but room and board. So, and I think it's 2% they're looking to do for that. So these costs continue to rise. And as Kim talked about earlier, because of the pandemic, the costs for the school have gone up, and they're trying to find ways to make up that shortage. Okay. And then the acceptance rates. This, the costs aren't the only thing that's gone crazy. The acceptance rates have too. The amount of applications students have put in. So if we compare in this chart from the 1990s to now 2020, well, we're 2021. The amount of applications has like almost doubled or more than doubled for some of these schools here. So here we're looking at Boston College in 1990. They had 11,516 students apply with a 56% acceptance rate. And now that is more than doubled the amount of applications. And of course that plummets the acceptance rate. So the acceptance rate is now only 24% there. Look at Harvard. They went from a 15% acceptance rate down to 5%. And Notre Dame in the 1990s was at 43% acceptance, and it's now down to 19%. And then the always so popular USC in California, they used to accept 70% of their students, and now we're down to 16%, which is always a killer for a lot of students. So, this craziness, this, rise in costs and rise in amount of applications and the students applying everywhere. How did we get there? So some of the crazy factors that are driving this is we have 2 times the amount of applicants than we used to. So how do we get 2 times the amount of applicants? Well, society, the United States, has decided that we want to sort of push a college education. We see the value of a college education. The workforce values it. They like to see degrees for some jobs. And even the curriculums in high school, I can remember back in the early 2000s, most of the high schools changed their curriculum so that anyone that graduated would have the right courses to enter into a college. So we've increased the applicants by 2 times the amount. We have 3 times the number of international applicants. Some of the schools have taken large amounts of international students to sort of make up for money losses. It's like a moneymaker for them because they can charge them double, sometimes triple the amount of money to get in. And so we have a large amount of international students, which has actually hurt some of the schools during the pandemic because these international students were not able to come into the country due to a federal regulation from the pandemic. Now we're thinking that's going to change as the pandemic hopefully gets under control and new regulations are coming in with the new administration. And then the Common App. So Kim talked about the Common Application. This was introduced in, I think it was like in the early 70s, but in the 90s, it really kind of took off because we had the internet. And what it allows you to do is fill out one application for multiple schools. There are over 900 schools on the Common App right now, so it makes it really easy to apply to 8 schools at once. You just fill out one application and then you have a few extra questions or essays for the specific schools. So no more paper, and people get tired of that and don't send it in. So this has increased the amount of applications. And then marketing efforts. The colleges themselves have decided they're going to start marketing their universities. And as Kim talked about, it really increased this year because they had to, and at least they've improved them. But one of the things they've done is they have put their marketing efforts even towards students who are not in their academic target. And one of the reasons they do that is sort of to increase their rankings from the US News and World rankings. So we'll talk about that next. So the US News World and Rankings, when that came out, that just took off like wildfire. Just like anything, people want to know what's the top 10 of this or top 10 of that. And, a lot of families that come to me with college lists, they'll start with the US World and News rankings or the Wall Street Journal rankings. And, it's okay to start there, but we really, really recommend taking the rankings with a grain of salt. One of the things that you can do to kind of identify what they're basing this on is their methodology. And we have this split up on these charts here. So, I'm not going to point everything out, but just take a look at the expert opinion, which is about 20%. What's expert opinion? Well, it's the colleges ranking each other. It's kind of like a popularity contest. You have deans and vice presidents saying, oh, I like this school and I like this school. And sometimes it's even counselors. So it's kind of crazy to me that 20% of their methodology is based on that. So these are really interesting to look at and they give you a good base, but there's so many more important factors to look at to make sure a college is a good fit for your student. So I'm going to have Kendall talk about that now, and she'll go through what those factors are.
Hi everyone, Kendall Hayes. Yeah, we are all but like begging you to please take U.S. News and World Report with a grain of salt. Please do not rely solely on that as your source of what's the best school for you. So, with that piece of advice in mind, what are you supposed to consider when you're trying to find colleges for your student? And for us collectively, as partners with Spotlight, we all advise to our students, you're really looking for the right fit, right? And when I think about the right fit, I think of three things. I'm going to get to them all. Obviously, academic fit, financial fit, and a social fit. So academic fit, what does that mean? Does the college of your choosing have the major that you're looking for? Or do they, if you are undecided, you don't know what you're going to study yet, do they have a great advising system to help you to kind of find your path and your journey once you get there? Do you want to be the smartest person in the class, or do you want to be surrounded by all wildly smart people? Do you want to be in a really collaborative environment, or do you want to be in a competitive environment? What does that kind of optimal and ideal classroom learning experience look like for you? Is it important to you that you're taught by a professor? Are you comfortable being taught by a graduate assistant, a GA? Does that matter to you? Obviously all of those components kind of factor into finding like what's the right academic fit for me? What am I looking for? And certainly if you are a student that's had an IEP or a 504 and you've had some support services along the way, when you're looking for a college, you want to really research and kind of do a deep dive into the services that are offered to you at the colleges of your choosing as well. Another component of fit, financial fit. Have you had the conversation with your husband, your partner, your child of how much college can you afford, right? What is, what's your student loan threshold? And I will often use the analogy of, looking for a house, because it's such a perfect analogy. And that is, if I were moving to the area, I was new to Naperville, and I had a housing budget of, let's say, $400,000. I wouldn't ask my realtor to then show me only, $1 million homes, right? Because I can't afford $1 million home. I'm going to fall in love with $1 million home. I'm going to want to buy $1 million home, and I can't afford $1 million home. So I'm going to ask my realtor to show me houses that are within my budget. And the same thing applies to the college setting. You really want to be careful of encouraging or pursuing colleges that in your heart of heart you can't afford. And I would add, I advise almost all of my families, all of my clients, to use what's called the net price calculator. It is on every single respective college's website. The net price calculator will give you an idea of how much your family is going to be expected to pay should your student ultimately land at that school. It is not a perfect tool. You have to take those numbers with a grain of salt, but it certainly can give you a kind of a heads up as to the affordability of that particular college. So obviously with financial fit, if you're worried about cost, if you're worried about being able to afford college, then you want to take into consideration your scholarship potential. You want to research the AP credit policy there. How many of those students that go to that particular college graduate in 4 years? This is a really important component because the average time that a student spends as an undergraduate, it's an average of 5.8 years. Who wants to pay for an extra 2 years of college? No one that I know of, right? So how many students of that particular school are graduating in 4 years? It's a really, really important component. Social fit, clearly there are a couple other things to consider, but social fit. Are you the type of student that hopes to meet 5 new people every single day? Or are you the type of student that is more, would rather just, meet maybe five close friends and have those close friends for a lifetime? Do you want to be a big fish in a small pond, or a small fish in a big pond? Do you want familiarity, right? Do you want to be close to home? Do you want to be in a surrounding or a region that's familiar to you? Or are you more adventuresome? Do you want to kind of explore? Do you want to get out of the region? Do you want to meet people from all over the, the country or perhaps the world? All things that you want to consider with the social fit. Sororities, fraternities. Do you want to be, tailgating every Saturday morning in the fall? Or are you, could you even tell me what the value of field goal is, right? So all of these things are really important when you're considering a social fit. Those are the three things that we kind of hone in on. Okay, and as you have kind of an understanding of fit and what we're looking for, I think the next really important piece of the puzzle is understanding selectivity. And what does that mean? And for me personally, it's one of the most kind of frustrating aspects of being in this industry, because I think so many people out there correlate selectivity with quality of an education. And that's most certainly not the case. If a school is less selective, that doesn't mean that they're offering an inferior product, an inferior educational experience. What it does mean is that they have a unique or different institutional mission. So when you think about a school that is accepting 75% or more of their applicants, they're accepting the great majority of the kids that apply, they simply have a mission to educate the masses. Okay, so they are every bit as interested and excited to educate maybe the average, C student, and they're equally as excited to educate the next Rhodes Scholar. So I think of my less selective schools as being very forgiving. I think of my less selective schools of being very inclusive. I think of my less selective schools really just wanting to cater to the masses and to all of our differences and all of our strengths, and things that we're going to bring to the table. So when you think of a less selective school, I think of a school that's going to look at a high school transcript and you know what? They're probably going to be okay with a couple of C's that you had your freshman or sophomore year. They're going to be okay with imperfection. They understand that that's part of the learning process. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're a crappy school, right? And that you're not going to get anything out of that for your education. As you kind of move down the line there on this chart, and we kind of move into that selective category, the 50 to 75% acceptance rate. Here, I think what you'll notice is that schools become maybe slightly less forgiving. They're going to be a little discouraged by the C's on a transcript. They would love to see a transcript that has primarily filled with some B's, high B's, A's. Maybe they're going to be forgiving of a couple of glitches over the 4 years, but by and large, they too have a fairly inclusive approach to the application or admission process. Now, as you kind of move down the list and we start talking about schools that are now denying more students than they're accepting, here's where they kind of become sticklers, right? Here's where we become less inclusive. Here's where colleges they really start to scrutinize the transcript, and they scrutinize the rigor within the curriculum, and their expectations are different. They expect their applicants, and certainly the applicants that matriculate, they expect almost all A's. Maybe a couple of B's in there, but all A's. They expect to see honors classes. They expect to see, an AP curriculum or an IB curriculum. I don't think we have many IB schools here, but whatever. AP, honors, A's primarily, maybe a couple B's in there, but that's really what they're looking for. And I should mention, obviously, the test score component too. These schools that are now rejecting the majority of their applicants, they're also looking for very strong standardized testing to support that really strong transcript and GPA and rigor within the curriculum. Last but certainly not least, with schools that have an acceptance rate below 25%. For me personally, when I have kids that come to me, my clients that say, hey, I'm super interested in Northwestern and the Middleburys of the world and the Dukes of the world, that's fantastic. But regardless of what their GPA is, regardless of what their transcript looks like, no matter what their test scores are, it's a reach school for them. And I will advise them accordingly. You know, I'm a big believer that you have to kind of set expectations up front. And I'm not saying, hey, this isn't possible, you're never going to get in. But I'm saying, hey, it's really tough to get into these schools, so we need to prepare accordingly. These schools really expect academic perfection. So they expect an academic profile that is full of honors and AP classes, primarily APs, the higher your grade level. They expect their students to take 4 years of all 5 core classes. So 4 years of an English, math, science, history, and a foreign language. My God, juniors out there, don't drop your foreign language your senior year if you're hoping to be a strong applicant for one of these highly or most selective schools. They're looking for, most of these applicants are going to have near perfect standardized test scores. So, you know, these schools are looking for something more. They're looking for what we call, you'll hear it referred to as a standout factor, as a hook, a passion project. They're looking for something beyond a perfect academic profile that's going to kind of reel them in, right? Something that's going to elevate that applicant in that application, or that applicant from their scores of other academically perfect applicants. So a couple other things I want to point out quickly. I know I can get long-winded on this slide. I'm sorry, I apologize, but I do want to point out that you'll notice that we've identified in some of the categories, you know, some acceptance rates are major specific. So for example, you'll notice that with U of I, it happens to fall in this highly selective category, but it is much more competitive. That acceptance rate that's published for U of I, if you want to apply to engineering or comp sci with U of I, that acceptance rate is drastically lower than what's presented on all the marketing material. So the same could be said for some out-of-state students. The acceptance rates that is published by some colleges may be higher than the acceptance rates for kids that are applying from out of state. And again, it all goes back to institutional mission and what that particular school is looking for to fill their entering class. Okay. This is a fun one. This is a really fun visual. You know, I think until, I'm a very visual person, so I think until your students start applying and they start receiving their admission decisions, I just think it's really so hard to grasp the nature of how competitive this world has become. And I say that honestly, not in an alarmist way, but I say that because I think it's so important to be prepared for what you're going to come across and what you're going to face. And knowledge is power in this process. I say it a million times to my families, to my clients. The more you know, the better you can prepare, the better, you know, you can put your best foot forward. But really nothing hones in on that point of how competitive it is out there, unless until you see this visual. So you can see with Notre Dame, and this refers to the entering class, the kids that are freshmen on Notre Dame's campus currently. In their applicant pool, they had 21,273 kids that applied. Of those, about 75% were academically qualified. I think it's one of the most important statistics. About 75% of that applicant pool, almost 16,000 applicants, had near perfect academic profiles and could be very successful on Notre Dame's campus academically, right? So there's no way, they can't possibly accept or admit all 16,000 of those academically perfect applicants. So what is it coming down to, right? They have to have a way to kind of differentiate between those applicants. Notre Dame ended up accepting a little over 4,000 of those applicants, and they took several things into consideration when forming their entering class of 2,200-ish students. But I want you to take a look at the kind of the breakdown here, and you'll notice that I think it comes out to about 46%, about half of the enrolled students had some kind of hook, some kind of appealing background to their story. 17% of their enrolled students came from, were first generation students or came from extremely low socioeconomic backgrounds. Accessibility is access is a really, really hot topic in higher education these days. And it is a mission. It is a mission of these schools, for these schools, to really kind of open their gates and opportunities to students that are coming from backgrounds that have traditionally been underrepresented. So you can see clearly for Notre Dame, that's a huge mission for them right now. If almost 20% of their enrolled student body is coming from that background, it's clearly important to them. You can see that about 20% of their enrolled students are legacies. Notre Dame's very transparent about the fact that they like their legacies, meaning that they've had a parent, a mom or a dad that have graduated from Notre Dame. You can see some of the athletic representation there in that category. And then of course, regionally, about 15% of that class is coming from the Midwest. So just a kind of brutal visual, but one that I think is really, really important to know. This obviously Notre Dame's one of many, many highly selective schools that would look very comparable to this if broken down. So moving right along. Let's talk a little bit about standardized testing. My goodness, has it been a wild ride for standardized tests this year in particular, given that so many testing sites were closed and canceled. So a lot of kiddos were not able to take standardized tests this year as they have been in years past. What is the PSAT? It's the precursor to the SAT. It's generally given to freshmen and sophomores in the spring of their school year. It is given to juniors in the fall of their junior year. And I think the big takeaway from the PSAT is that when your student takes the PSAT, and it's typically in the fall, they actually added a PSAT date for juniors this year. It's coming up. I think it's coming up next week, right? January 26th. Anyway, the PSAT score that's earned in the junior year is what is used to determine whether or not your student is a national merit semifinalist. So that's something to consider. And some schools have some scholarships that are associated with their national merit finalists. That if you qualify with your test score. So SAT and ACT, the main standardized tests that are out there that are taken into consideration with schools. It's always asked, does a college prefer the SAT or the ACT or the ACT or the SAT? It does not matter. Historically, I think when I was applying to college, maybe when Kim and Georgia were applying to college, there used to be kind of the adage, and I don't even know what coast liked what, but there used to be a thing that I think the East Coast
Midwest was ACT, East Coast SAT.
Okay, there you go. Well, you know what, guys, it doesn't matter anymore. So for my clients, my clients are encouraged to do a diagnostic practice SAT and ACT. I will evaluate their scores and determine which test they should pursue given their test scores, and which test they should focus their prep efforts on from that point forward. So biggest differences between the SAT and the ACT, obviously the SAT, you're going to see two components there, English and math. The SAT, the highest score you can get is a 1600. The SAT, there is a no calculator portion. That would be terrible for me. And then the SAT allows for a little bit more time per question. So oftentimes students feel like they're not quite as rushed on the SAT as they are when they take the ACT. ACT, highest score you can get is a 36, and they break down the test into 4 different categories: English, math, reading, and science. Okay. Subject tests. This is new and exciting as of literally probably 24 hours ago. Subject tests are going away, and I will not, it's a long time coming. Right? I mean, this is just crazy that it's taken so long for them. This is one good thing that's come from COVID. But I'm not going to bore you with the history of the subject tests. Just know that effective immediately, subject tests are no longer a thing. So they will not be required or recommended by any colleges that your student will ultimately be applying to. And last but not least, we have the AP tests. The important thing to think about AP is that AP scores are very rarely considered as part of the evaluative process during applications or when your student's applying. They will be, however, considered. If you earn certain scores on your AP exams, you could potentially earn college credit. They could potentially be used for placement purposes. And I know for some of my clients, if they've done extraordinarily well in the AP tests, I will have them send their score of a 5 because I think it, obviously shows mastery of a subject area and can be kind of a differentiating factor for some of them. So, that's all something that we advise on, a client by client basis. Kim talked a bit about test optional earlier because that's definitely been on the rise since so many testing sites were closed due to the pandemic. A lot of schools, more schools went test optional. And what does that mean? It just means that students can elect to either send a test score if they have one that they're proud of, or not. If students feel that their transcript and their academic profile is a better representation of kind of what they bring to the table than their test scores, then test optional schools say, don't send us the test score. We're just going to evaluate you based on your, the rigor within your curriculum, your GPA, your extracurricular activities, essay, and all of those other factors that we'll kind of talk a little bit more about here in just a minute. For a complete list of test optional schools, the website there, fairtest.org, is fantastic. I don't know about Kim and Georgia. I think it's going to be really interesting to see, how many of these schools that were not test optional, that became test optional, are going to stay test optional. And my guess, this is just my inclination, is that I really think you're going to see a lot of schools revert back to their non-test optional status. Who knows? We'll see if I'm right. It changes every day.
A few, I would say there's probably, if I had to guess a percentage, 10, 15, 20% are saying they're going to do it as a 2-year trial. So for the class of, 2021 and potentially the class of 2022. But then as we discuss as counselors, when you get 50,000 applications, you need another data point beyond GPA. And I don't know if I know a lot of this, Compass Test Prep, which is a test prep provider that we like a lot, did a webinar I listened to, and they were just talking about grade inflation across the US. So it's virtually impossible for these colleges to evaluate high schools and compare them to one another, even understanding your high school's profile, just because of the grade inflation. So there's going to need to be another data point. In fact, Compass has kind of come out in front and said they think that with the subject tests going away, that the AP tests might start to carry more weight in the application. The problem is that only about 80% of high schools offer AP classes and exams. So we're fortunate in this area. I think all of most of the students we work with have a lot of possible options for AP classes. But I thought that was really interesting when I read that.
So it's so interesting.
I do think too that as these colleges go through this, they want to see how these students did in 4 years, at their university. Did they sort of select the student that can handle the course load there? So I think in a few years, they're going to be evaluating how that kind of all turns out. So we'll see.
Yeah, and so many schools use the test scores as part of their, how they're figuring out merit-based awards. So, and again, it's really unrealistic for these colleges that have 50, 60,000 applicants that are rolling through for them to kind of revise and revamp their entire review process in order to try to figure out how are we going to award merit-based scholarships using just, a student's transcript, GPA, and rigor. It's sadly just really unrealistic. So.
And it was interesting this year for the seniors, as the colleges were figuring it out, they would say we're test optional, but you need the test. Some of them would say you need the test for the scholarship because they hadn't figured that piece out yet. So that obviously became difficult for them, and most of them ended up dropping that, but some of them still did keep it.
They
So
do. Yeah, they're
yeah, so it's, it's kind of crazy, but it's just like the virus itself. Every day is new, and they keep trying different ways to do things. So.
So we talked a little bit about application strategy, and when I was applying to school, application strategy, what? I mean, I was applying to schools, we send it off, whenever, meet the deadline, great, get the admission decision, and life rolls on. It just doesn't work that way. And I know all three of us, work one-on-one, obviously, with our clients to help them to decide, when should I submit what application? We all kind of divvy up a calendar. Like, here's when you submit this. Here's when you're going to try to submit this, this application. And every school has different admission deadline options and different opportunities, I guess, for when students can submit their application. So you'll hear a lot of these terms coming up over the next couple of years. I'll give you a really quick breakdown, hopefully quick. I'm not very quick, but I try to be quick. Breakdown on what all of these mean and what it means to you. Rolling decision, you submit your application and the offices of admission are reading them and they're spitting out an admission decision very quickly. So applications in, admissions decisions go out on a continual rolling basis, right? Early action. Early action is a non-binding agreement that says, hey, if you submit your application by a specific date, typically on or around November 1st, then we are going to guarantee an admission decision by a certain date. Typically speaking, it is on or around, the holidays, mid-December, or at a date specified by that particular school. I feel like a lot of schools are kind of pushing that admission decision date out a bit. But regardless, you submit your application by a certain date, and we will promise an admission decision by a certain date. That is what early action means. I love early action. I think anytime you can get your application in and your admission decision back with a little time to let, to sleep on it and to kind of explore your options, I think it's generally a good thing. I think that applying early action often is a form of demonstrated interest. It means I really like your school. I know that I like your school, and I'm ready to submit my application to kind of prove to you that I'm interested. So that's early action. Now, early decision is similar to early action, except in a big way. Early decision is a binding agreement. So early decision says, hey, you apply by a specific date, again, typically on or around November 1st. We are going to guarantee you an admission decision by a specific date. But if you're accepted, you have to come here. Have to come to our school. Not only that, you have to pull all of the other applications that you have out there. So you don't get to wait and see where else you've been accepted. You don't get to wait and see what other scholarship offers are out there. If you apply and you're accepted, you're coming. Early decision can be hugely advantageous. It can drive up acceptance rates tremendously. And the reason being is because colleges, it's a shoo-in, right? They have kids and applicants that they know with 100% certainty want to be there. And if they with 100% certainty want to be there, then they're likely going to stay not only their freshman year, but their sophomore year. That helps their retention rate. And if their retention rate goes up, guess what? Their rankings go up. So it's a win-win for the college and truly a win-win for the student as well, if they know that far in advance that that's the college that they are just diehard, that they really want to go to. You should know that not every college offers an early decision option. So that's obviously going to be college specific. Not every college offers an early action option. So these options are very college specific. Early decision 2, same binding agreement, but with a later application submission date. So early decision 2 is pretty new. I would say within the last 2 to 3 years, it's really kind of come onto the scene. I think it's going to explode. I look for more and more colleges to offer an early decision 2. What's great about this is that if a student was denied early decision 1 and they still feel really, really strongly about their second choice school, and they also offer an ED2 option, that can again be advantageous in the process. So restricted early action, I hate this one. I'm not going to lie. I don't like it at all. Restrictive early action, but it is what it is. No one asked my opinion. So restricted early action means, hey, you can, in some instances, in many instances, you can apply early to us, but you can't apply early decision to anyone else unless they're a public institution, right? A public research school or a rolling school, or so restricted early action has stipulations surrounding it, and restrictive early action really varies greatly from school to school. Every restrictive early action college has kind of their own nuances to the restrictions that they place. Some are a little bit more flexible than others, but it takes away, in many cases, it takes away the early decision option altogether, and obviously will dictate what other types of schools you're allowed to apply to early. And then regular decision has simply a later submission deadline, typically on or around January 1st or January 15th, sometimes as late as February 1st. That just is saying, if you apply by that regular decision deadline, colleges will give their admission decision to you typically sometime in early to late March. And then you have a month to decide where you want to go to school. So that's regular decision applications.
Kendall, do you want to talk a little bit about why someone wants to start their research early and why they'd be compelled to want to go early decision? Like, what are the advantages? What percentage of the freshman class typically comes out of the ED 1 and 2 pool?
Yeah, I mean, Kim, if you want to talk about specific numbers, you're welcome to.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, I mean, early decision, I feel like I kind of explained that it's advantageous to the colleges because they know that they're attracting kids that really, really want to be there. And if they really want to be there, then they're going to stay put. So it helps colleges from the planning perspective. If they can kind of guarantee that half of their class is going to be filled with early decision applications or applicants, that's very helpful to them from the planning perspective. If they know already what that yield, it helps certainly with their yield. So of the number of applicants that apply, how many are actually gonna come? But
Right.
Kim, feel free
just for perspective, I just always pull numbers because this is always fascinating. So just for perspective, like a school like Duke in the regular decision round would be around an 8% acceptance rate. But if you apply early decision, it's 24% acceptance rate. Northwestern, 7% regular decision round acceptance, 27% in the early decision round. WashU, 13% regular decision round, 42% in the early decision round. So I don't take it lightly, but for the clients that have a favorite school and they have done the research and the family has talked to either the financial aid office and knows it's a financial fit, or the family is willing to pay full price on the reverse. I just think it can be a really nice strategy for people and just understanding the multiples typically. And it's not at every school, like Kendall said, they don't all take it, but the schools that do offer it, it can triple your odds of admission.
I mean, it's a game changer. It's a total game changer. And yeah, that's something that, each of us will respectively really figure out and work with your family to decide, is that a good move for me, right? Is that something that we should be considering? So awesome. Thanks, Kim. So what are colleges considering? And one thing's for sure, you can bet your bottom dollar that whether it's a less selective school or a highly selective school and anything in between, all colleges are going to be looking at grades. All of them. That's always going to be a factor or consideration, is transcript, GPA, and the types of classes that your students have chosen to take during their 4 years of high school. 9 times out of 10, they are also going to be considering standardized test scores. That's just kind of the two components that are first and foremost. How'd they do in school? What's their GPA? What do their test scores look like? Certainly, extracurricular activities could come into the mix. Essays are a consideration for some colleges, but not necessarily all. letters of recommendation are factors that are considered, but I think there is a misconception out there that every college is going to want to see 2 teacher letters of recommendation. That's definitely not the case. I would say the majority, maybe they want to see 1, maybe they don't really need to see any. U of I, if you send a letter of recommendation, it's going to go straight into the shredder. But for the highly and most selective schools out there, those letters of recommendation are critical, as are the essays, as are the extracurricular activities and what you've done outside of class. Demonstrated interest is an interesting one. It's particularly taken on, some different ebbs and flows over the years. COVID's thrown a wrench into this factor as well, because one of the greatest forms of demonstrated interest in the past is going to visit a college campus, getting on campus, registering for the tour, registering for the information session. It really, with this increase of applicants and with kids that are applying now on average to 8 to 12 colleges, it's very hard for a college to determine how interested is this student in our school. Are we number 1 at that school's list, or are we number 12? And, if we accept this student, how likely are they to come to my school? So demonstrated interest is becoming a more popular, I think, factor in the application review process, as colleges are really trying to understand how interested is this student in my school. Another kind of reason the early decision is so critical and has such profound impact on acceptance rates. There's really no form of greater demonstrated interest than applying to a school early decision. So other kind of components of demonstrated interest, if you're really interested in a school, read the emails that they send. Boston College is kind of famous for this. They'll send emails and they track, did the student open the email? Did they click on links within the email? How many times have they visited our website? What are they looking at? Business programs? Are they looking at engineering? I mean, they are tracking everything that you do, kind of your online footprint, if you will, to see how interested you really are. Interviews are very infrequently part of the admission decision process, but they could very well become a part of, if your student qualifies for a top scholarship on campus, they may be asked to interview. Alum interviews are out there. I normally give my clients some very specific school-specific advice on kind of the value of an interview that's taking place with an alum versus one that's taking place with an admission rep. So that's something to kind of think about. And then, of course, standout factors. And, if you are really interested in a school that may be less selective, may fall on the spectrum of not being very selective, is it imperative that you have a standout factor, something about you or your application that's really going to elevate your application amongst your peers and those people that you're competing against? No, probably not. Probably a standout factor isn't going to be absolutely critical, depending on the school, depending on the major that you want to pursue. But for the more competitive degrees out there, for the more competitive schools out there, a standout factor can become, crucial. And I'll tell you what, they take time to develop, and they need to come from a very genuine space. So those are all things that we kind of help our students and families navigate.
Okay, so I am going to dive into the financial piece of the paying for college element. And as I said earlier, when we were kind of talking to Susan in the beginning, this could be an entire hour presentation in and of itself. So it's going to be sort of a basic overview of the financial paying for college process and how it works. So there are 2 types. There, need-based financial aid is a form of financial aid for families that are typically the lower end of the income spectrum. The universities that are trying to identify those families so they can assist them, there's 2 different forms they use. The first one is the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. And that is something that for the seniors, you could have already filled out. And if you haven't, get it on your to-do list starting October 1st of your senior year. And it's based on your prior year's tax returns. So you want to be putting in, your basically FAFSA is very focused on your adjusted gross income. It doesn't care, how big your house is, how many cars you drive. It doesn't look at your net worth. It's very income driven document. So it will be something that is going to identify for the school if you're someone that could potentially qualify for financial aid. And some of the schools will require it, even if you're not going to qualify for financial aid, if you're interested in merit scholarships. But I don't know, Kendall and Georgia, I feel like we've had this conversation, and less schools seem to be requiring it for merit scholarships. But sometimes
Some do.
I'm sorry.
Yes, some do though. Some do.
Some still do, for sure. So what we typically would advise a student or family is to fill out the FAFSA your freshman year. First of all, you will have it on file if something were to happen, heaven forbid, a loss of a job or a divorce or a death of a parent, something like that. It's on file, but then you also will be able to get some sense of what the school might offer you, if anything. The FAFSA is, the other financial document is the CSS profile. So the more selective schools that have the larger endowments that are a little more selective about who they want to give their money to, they're going to be a little bit more particular. So the CSS profile, they are going to do a deep dive on your financials. So the FAFSA it's shifting, which I'll talk about in a minute, but currently the FAFSA is about 3 pages long. You can fill it out probably in about a half an hour. The CSS profile is significantly longer. If you know what you're doing and you have your financial information together, it'll probably take you a little over an hour, but it's a deep dive. They want to know, retirement assets are excluded, of course, but they want to know if you have money in 529 plans. They want to know, what kind of investments you have that you could potentially tap in to pay for college. So those are the two main forms. And I'm going to chat a little bit more about the FAFSA. So currently the FAFSA is focused very much on the concept of EFC, which is expected family contribution. And basically there's a formula that the government uses to determine what they think you can afford. But the reality is that the government thinks you can afford far more than you think you can afford. So COA is cost of attendance. So the government has you put in all of your adjusted gross income information. They generate this EFC number for you. If you deduct that from the cost of attendance, then it comes up with this financial need number that's sort of this unknown, number. What happens a lot of times is students and parents think that means that if they have financial need, that the school is going to provide them with those resources. And unfortunately, big red letters, eligible. So just because you're eligible and you have that financial need does not mean that the school is necessarily going to award you that money. So you have to make sure, as you're filling out your FAFSA and creating your school list, Kendall touched on earlier, understanding the cost, right? The net price calculator, if you Google Northwestern University net price calculator, bing, it pops up and you key in all of your information. That will give you an idea of what the cost is going to be. And then if they're saying that Northwestern is going to cost a family like you $75,000 and Northwestern does not determine you have any financial need, you are going to be paying $75,000. So the EFC is, I mentioned earlier, based on your prior. So for the current senior class, you're looking at your 2019 tax returns. The government has this really swanky thing called the data retrieval tool. So basically they import all the data from your federal tax return, uploads it, and it kind of couldn't be easier unless you're divorced or if you're a sole proprietor, it can get a little tricky. But in general, don't be afraid of it. Fill it out the first year. So if you are on this call and you have a senior, please go in and just fill it out. And it's something that your student will have an ID, you'll have an ID. They need to be involved in the process, but I encourage you to do that. So the government has realized that families were getting very focused on that concept of financial need and misunderstanding basically what the government was able to provide in terms of aid. So starting for the current sophomore class, so the people that'll be in the 2022, 2023 application cycle, starting college in fall of 2023, the EFC is no longer going to be called, the FAFSA is no longer going to use the concept of EFC. So they are converting it to a term called Student Aid Index. And basically FAFSA is doing this the whole retool. Everyone had time, I guess, over COVID to dive in on all of this stuff. They are basically reducing it. It's going to go from being 36 or 40 questions down to 10 or 12, reduced significantly. Their goal is to get more people filling it out so that they can understand who really has a need and who doesn't. And then one of the things I didn't touch on here, but some of the schools even have their own financial aid form. So they will make it super simple for you and say, you know what, you don't need to fill out the FAFSA or the EFC. WashU is one of those. We want you to just fill out our form. There's, it'll take less than 15 minutes. And it really does allow them, Kendall talked about earlier about, that notion of trying to help everyone, right? And it really allows the families that potentially aren't as sophisticated financially to have the ability to complete that form a little quicker. So it's all about kind of access. The next piece is sort of understanding the different ways that financial aid can be generated, or the universities have the ability, as does the government. So these are government grants, need-based grants. So there's the Pell Grant, Teachers Grant, there's grants for healthcare if you're going into that field, certain levels. If you're a veteran, I will say typically the Pell Grant is one of the more common ones that the universities will focus on in their institutional mission. And Pell Grant are typically families, just for perspective, since we all feel like, oh my gosh, I could make more money, right? Pell Grant families are families that typically make about $60,000 a year or less for a family of 4. So if you're in that wheelhouse, that's where you are. Please go in and research all of the different options that you can have. The state of Illinois offers a MAP grant, which is also can be up about $5,000 a year. So over the course of your time in college, $20,000 will be a nice chunk of change. But the kind of caveat with that one is that you have to go to school in the state of Illinois, which makes sense, right? If the state of Illinois is giving you money, they want to make sure the money is staying in state. So grants are one option. Another one, as Kendall touched on earlier, is merit-based scholarships. So those are driven on grades, depending on the university. It could be grades, test scores. Sometimes it's for a particular talent that you might have. Some of the schools will give merit scholarships for leadership. So there's all different ways that they kind of calculate what they feel as though you have earned. Work study is another element. So those are typically for the more need-based students that they are going to get a job on campus. And it'll be part of your award letter when you receive your acceptance in the spring. But know that that's not a lump sum of money that you're given. It's something that's paid out over the course. You're going to be getting a job on campus and you're going to be earning work study money from that job to help you with more day-to-day living expenses. So it's not, you're going to see it as a lump award on your award letter, but it's not going to be given to you in any kind of, lump sum. And the last thing is loans. Georgia touched on earlier, right? So for me, this is the biggest travesty, and this is why we all do what we do and try and help families, is to try and have them get through this process, identify schools that have the right financial fit in addition to the other fit factors, so that the students are not going to be saddled with this excessive student loan debt when they graduate. So right now, the loan debt is about $1.6 trillion with a T, which makes me want to throw up actually every time I say it. And a large part of that is what is called Parent Plus loans. So the government has student loans that I've kind of identified down here, but a student on an aggregate basis can get a subsidized loan from the government capped at about $31,000. That is for 4 years, folks. So when you saw some of those sticker prices that Georgia talked about earlier, you're not going to be going to those schools that cost $75,000 unless you're able to qualify for substantial need-based aid, right? So the student loan limit at the $31,000, families that try and spend out of their price range sometimes will then try and make up the difference with something called a Parent Plus loan. The Parent Plus loans have a very high rate of interest, and they are not subsidized. So subsidized loans means the government's going to lend you the money, and you as a student won't start paying anything back on that loan until you graduate, as long as you stay in school at least 50% time or more. So what happens with the unsubsidized loans, the Parent Plus loans, is that the interest starts accruing day one and you start paying day one. So it's really important, and that fit is so critical, the financial fit for us when we talk to families, because we don't want a student to get in a situation where they're borrowing excessive amounts of money and ending up like Georgia was talking about with like a car, or in some cases, there's families that will, they're saying the student's going to own it even though the parents are signing for it, and the student ends up with a mortgage basically at graduation. So be really, really cognizant of that. There are lots of good options we're going to talk about of other ways to approach it in a little bit. So I want to touch on the merit-based scholarships a little bit, just so you can get a sense of what we're talking about when we talk about merit. So Miami of Ohio, so this is based on last year's information. Miami of Ohio this year is saying they're not going to look at test scores, and so they're going to be focused strictly on GPA. So they're one of the schools. So typically this slide, we talk a little bit about test prep and how it can have value for every point, kind of giving you some additional money, right? If this scenario last year for Miami of Ohio, if you had a 33 ACT and a 3.5, you got $20,000 a year. And then if you drop 3 points, it drops to 56,000. So for schools that are going to be tying the merit scholarship and still having an ACT or SAT component, it might make sense to invest in a little test prep if it'll bump you up into the next merit scholarship category. So the thing with Miami of Ohio this year, they're talking strictly about GPAs. However, when you apply, then they're saying if you have a test score, they will consider that. So it's sort of, I feel like we're on a little bit of quicksand right now with merit scholarships and how the schools are evaluating them. So I think all three of us would collectively advise that if you can get a strong test score, get it. Do it, and it's going to only benefit your scholarship opportunities. So University of Alabama still cares about your test scores. So they are somebody that's come out and been very, very strong on students in the Chicagoland area. Illinois is number one in having the most exports, more students go out of state for college than stay in state. Alabama has been basically preying on that and throwing all this, I call it football money, throwing all this football money at these smart kids, right? So they're saying and the ACT was the one with the top score of 36, Kendall talked about earlier. So if you get a 30 or higher, we're going to give you 72,000 over that 4-year period. Really big money. So I tell families, we're not talking about $5 or $10, right? So when you're looking at these schools, evaluate what the merit scholarship opportunities look like. Many of the schools are super transparent and will put this information on their website. Some of the schools are a little less transparent. And then we go based on kind of our history of understanding the school's award history, as well as some industry resources that we use to be able to help. So if a family says to us, the maximum out of pocket we want for college is, pick a number, $40,000, then we are going to work to create a list of schools that their student can be successful in that 8, 10, 12 schools Georgia talked about in the beginning that will fall in that budget. So super important to us. Hope College, another fantastic option. And you can kind of see the ACT scores are a little lower, but the awards are still significant. So if you have 26, versus 24, it can be a difference in $4,000. And sometimes as a parent of 3 children, I will tell you, I encourage them to motivate their kids, right? So if you have someone that's not a real go-getter and doesn't want to do test prep and Khan Academy has great, phenomenal free test resources, get on there, incentivize them a bit, maybe say, if you get your score up from a 24 to a 26, I'm going to write you a check for $500. And here it is. If you have those resources, my point is that if your child is someone that needs to be motivated, be creative. And the bottom line is that, a point can make a difference in a lot of cases based on the test score for thousands of dollars. And then just make sure you always check year to year, particularly now, Hope in Alabama, these numbers are all still current. Miami, as I said, is taking the testing away and just going on GPA. And then the next piece is called Show Me the Money, right? So it's kind of trying to help you understand how students with the same grades and test scores can be evaluated differently by two schools. So the example is a student that has a 32 ACT, which is a really solid ACT score, and a 4.0 GPA. So somewhere like University of Dayton, phenomenal school, is going to give Sally $102,000 for those stats. So Dayton, footnote, is saying that they're going to go test optional permanently. So we'll see if it sticks. They're on a 2-year trial hoping to go permanent. So they did say in the fine print that they would still take a look at your test score if you had it, FYI. All right. Same student, same stats, applying to Villanova, 0 in merit scholarships. So the point of this story, and we'll give a couple more examples, is that whole financial fit conversation, right? Understanding if you're somebody that really is focused on maximizing your merit scholarships or your financial aid, that you are applying to the schools that can either meet 100% of your demonstrated financial need or are going to be generous with merit scholarships. Next student, 30 ACT and a 3.75 GPA. University of Kansas is going to give them $67,000, and a really nice chunk of money over 4 years. I should say as a caveat too, with many of these merit scholarships, you will have some kind of a minimum GPA requirement to maintain while you are in college. So heaven forbid you don't understand that and pick that school, because it puts it in your budget with the merit money and you lose the scholarship. So keep that in the back of your mind, students, that you still have to really work hard when you're there. So
And
Susie,
be a full-time student too.
right.
Yeah, some students drop down below. Yeah.
Most of the merits then at University of Illinois, that same score, Susie's student, is going to get nothing. And part of it is, sadly, Illinois is broke as a state, so we don't really have merit scholarship opportunities. They implemented something a couple of years ago called the Aim High grant that's focused at the uber top percentages of their incoming freshman class. And then they are given a nominal amount relative to this. It's not peanuts, but it's probably going to be around $4,000 or $5,000 a year. But that's a tippy top kind of kids we're talking about. So then the last example is Sam, who has a 25 ACT and a 3.5 GPA, and University of Kentucky is going to give him 10 grand a year. Love it. And Clemson, same kid, same stats, is giving him nothing. So kind of that same message that we're trying to drive home for families is know the schools, understand what their merit aid history is, understand what your budget is, so you're not going to get in trouble. All right, here's some other tips we're going to talk about really quick. Where am I on time? Ooh, really quick. All right, so scholarships, private scholarships are kind of the most, you hear, oh, there's millions of dollars of private scholarships that go unclaimed every year. The reality is most private scholarships are less than $1,000 or less, right? People focus on the Koch and these national scholarships that a lot of the students never win. So our strategy is start with the merit. We touched on that. Local organizations, your Chamber of Commerce, your Junior Women's Club, your high school has amazing private scholarship opportunities. Right now, our seniors are working on, typically the kind of the timing is you get your applications in, then you start filling out scholarships to try and maximize and reduce that cost. So the local private, and then very last, you can look at some of those nationals. There's big government. There's lots of different databases that you can use, but the reality is you're going to set up a profile. They're going to spew a lot of things at you. You're going to have much better success focusing locally. So a lot of times the scholarships will have different requirements. They might have service hour requirements, different things that you need to have accomplished by the time you're applying as a senior. So I always encourage my juniors to be looking now when they're out in the guidance office for the seniors and just kind of see what the scholarships look like and what they are, what you have to do to qualify. One of the things that we tried to, I guess, get across in the last few slides is if you drop a tier in terms of your selectivity, Kendall talked about the 4 tiers of selectivity. you automatically are going to elevate and have a better chance for merit scholarships. There's something called a preferential package where you're in the top 25% of that incoming class. You are going to be a rock star at that school. So those are the types of schools that are going to be more generous. So although it's a feel good to say I got into, I don't know, pick a school, Duke, if you're going to be paying full price at Duke, but you could go to University of Arizona and you're going to get an engineering degree and you're going to get a full ride, keep it in mind. Many students look at the big picture. You might be going to grad school, medical school, something else down the road. So look at total cost. This is a good one, Midwest Student Exchange Program for those of us living in this area. It's kind of a tuition reciprocity agreement with a lot of folks across the Midwest. I listed some of the states. It typically focuses on the smaller schools like a University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, University of Minnesota, Mankato. So what the policy is that as this reciprocity arrangement, you would pay 150% of what their in-state students pay. So it's significantly less than out of state and not quite as cheap as being in-state. So check it out, just Google Midwest Student Exchange and you'll see there's some tax credits, again, have sort of lower level income cap outs, but American Opportunity and Lifetime Learning Credit that can combine to $10,000, $15,000, so can be worth it. Our biggest thing too we love is knowing that it's not where you start, it's where you finish. And there are a lot of we're blessed to have College of DuPage in our backyard. There are a lot of really strong community college programs. You go in, you can knock out your gen eds the first couple of years. You go in with a plan, obviously. You want to make sure that those credits are going to transfer. There's some, Illinois has with COD Pathways to Engineering, which is a really strong program that allows you to get basically a 4-year engineering degree from U of I for half the cost. So check it out. Don't forget about your community colleges. Kendall talked about this earlier. We're paying for 4, not 5.8. So graduate on time. Becoming an RA, which is like the dorm police, free room and board comes with it. And I think, room and board at a lot of schools can be $15,000, $16,000, $17,000 a year. So it's a good chunk of change. And then AP scores, 3, 4, 5 can basically, a lot of the more private and selective schools, you have to take this rigorous curriculum with the APs to be a compelling candidate. They are not going to give you credit for those classes. Typically, it's going to bump you up to the next level. But a state school and many of the state schools will give you these credits. So if you are someone that goes in with a lot of credit AP classes and you do well on the exams, you can potentially start as a sophomore your first year. So that's a way to save, $30,000. So sorry, I'm blowing through that. I'm trying to get to Q&A. Can you look, are there questions in the Q&A?
Not right now. If anybody does have a question,
yeah, so
pop it in really quick.
So I'll tell you a little bit about Spotlight, if there's anything you have about questions, and otherwise we have overwhelmed you with information and you can't process to ask a question. So Spotlight College Advising, one of our partners couldn't be here tonight, but there's 4 of us, and we are basically independent education consultants. We are focused on just really personalized service with our families. We very much cap our loads of families that we work with. A lot of the high schools, typically the public high schools, the counselors will have, 250, 300. State of California, I think they have like 550 per student, but just large loads. So we're about personalized service. We have a curriculum that we all follow that we're really proud of and that we think is successful. We have a lot of experience and expertise and collaboration that goes behind it. And really, we're just committed to being honest and ethical how we operate. We are, that Kendall talked about earlier, just going to be really straight with you about what we think is the best path. We're obviously going to take all of your feedback and make sure you have a really balanced list, but we want to make sure that your experience is just a really positive one. We all, if you haven't figured it out yet, all of us are super passionate about this process and just helping families really just enjoy it. And the one thing I'll say, having gone through this whole slide deck and you're probably feeling overwhelmed, and most families say, oh my gosh, I want to get a glass of wine after this, is remember that the process should be enjoyable, right? You want it to be fun. It is the only time in your student's life that they're going to have, I mean, they'll potentially go to graduate school, but for undergraduate to explore the schools, take the time, do the research. Sorry, I've talked a ton. Georgia and Kendall, jump in, like just.
Right.
No,
Oh, good.
it's all good advice, great advice. So I don't think we have any questions.
Okay.
Well,
great.
ladies, thank you so much. This has been incredibly informative. I've got my pad of notes. I've got a junior, so I'm all ready to go now. But it's been a wonderful evening. Thanks so much for your help. And thank you for everyone joining us today. And I hope you all have a good evening.
Oh, Susan, sorry. One thing I didn't say too, and it was my final slide I didn't click to. If people do want a copy of the slide deck, oops, I should have done that.
You know what? I can, if you email it to me, I can
I'll
send it out.
to you. Okay, perfect. We're happy to share it.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Susan, so much for
Thank
having
you.
me. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
so much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
night, everyone.
You too.
Thank
Bye.
you.